Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Tim McGuinness. I'm a director with the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, SCARS. SCARS is a government-registered crime victims assistance nonprofit organization based in Miami, Florida, as well as in Monterrey, Nuevo Leon, Mexico, with affiliates in more than 60 countries around the world, including our good friends Waspada Scammer Sinta in Indonesia, our friends in Japan, our friends in Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and throughout Europe with Internet Valkyrie. Additionally, we have an affiliate organization in Guangzhou, China, SCARS China. The purpose of this presentation today, this is not a support group, this is a presentation of information relevant on the topic of the psychology of scams. So we hope you'll sit back with a cup of coffee in a SCARS mug, of course, and enjoy our presentation. We're going to be talking about some difficult subjects today. Do not think of this as a scolding or a belittling. We're going to talk about difficult subjects in a very factual, truthful way. And it may be difficult, but hearing the truth sometimes is essential and necessary in every scam victim's journey to become a survivor and a thriver. So with that, let me turn it over to my co-host, Debby Montgomery Johnson, who is an author, entrepreneur, nonprofit businesswoman, and just an incredible motivator, speaker, a military veteran like myself, and a director of SCARS also. So Debby, please introduce yourself if you would.
Thank you, Dr. Tim. It's always a pleasure to be the sidekick here. And this is really an important topic, and I'm glad that you're addressing it. I'm very grateful to be here to ask questions. You and I've had some extraordinary conversations, some shows together on Stand Up and Speak Up, and I think we've got some good information for people, and I want to let the women know that are listening, men too, but for the women, that I'm here for you. I've been through what you've been through. Dr. Tim challenges me a lot in these types of things because I have the same feelings that you have had in the past about why I trusted, who I trusted, the message that I trusted, and the lies that I trusted. And so this is going to be a really interesting conversation for me. I have not prepared for it other than Tim has shown me the presentation, and this is going to be very extemporaneous, but very factual, and I'm glad to be here. So Dr. Tim, trust is a really big word. It's a 5-letter word. What is your definition, or what is the definition of trust that we're going to use today?
Well, I'm going to get into that in a few moments, but fundamentally, it is the ability to confide in, count on, rely upon a person or a message or a thing or an institution. It's something where you can place yourself in a position of vulnerability, relying on that other entity, that other messaging to be reliable and factual. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be nice or pretty. It doesn't mean it's going to be warm and fuzzy. It does not mean that it's going to get you up in the morning, but it does mean that ultimately, it's something that you can rely on to inform your behavior, your emotions, your practices, and your behavior. And that's why we're talking about this today. Because, Debby, as you know, we've helped nearly 12,000 people through our support groups. And I had a lengthy conversation yesterday, almost 3 hours, with a psychologist in Colorado who's interested in directing her practice specifically to scam victims, something that is unique in the United States. And we've been talking for quite some time about what that might mean, both positively and negatively. And a big part of our conversation was the nature of SCARS services, but also a very realistic, factual view of scams in general, including the number of scams that we believe materialized in 2021, For example, the organization Zelle and the other money transfer services have reported that as many as 18 million scam victims used those services last year. We realistically believe that there were over 30 million scam victims in the United States alone in 2021. However, the Federal Trade Commission reported that there were only 450,000, which, by the way, is a 60% improvement year over year in reporting. So reporting is on the right track, but it's still 1% of the realistic number of scam victims that are out there. And that's just in the United States. There might have been as many as 100 million victims worldwide last year. We do not know. Nobody knows for a fact. We estimate it to be somewhere around 50 million worldwide, to be somewhat conservative. We know that there were 5 million Brazilians scammed. You add that with the Zelle and Western Union and MoneyGram numbers, already we're into the 20s. So scamming is continuing to be an absolute plague. And this is going to sound like I'm blaming, but I'm actually not. I'm observing, and there is a difference between the two. Part of the reason why scamming continues to be so out of control is, now I am going to blame the government, because the government takes reports, does not attempt to properly analyze the real magnitudes. They simply take the reports at face value and say, oh, 450,000 reports, that's not such a big problem. Well, the truth is it's 100 times that. But why doesn't the government fully understand the problem? Because victims don't report. That's a fact. If 1% of victims report these crimes, the government can wear their rose-colored glasses everywhere in the world and think this is just a bunch of people who were naive and gullible and foolish. Mm-hmm. Of course, we know none of these are, in fact, gullible or foolish or naive. None of you are. You're the victims of professional, methodical, thoroughly trained scam criminals, professional, multinational, organized criminals. It's not your fault. The only mistake that was made was the initial connection. Once the conversation began, you lost control. All right, so what I'm going to do is I am going to jump into our presentation at this point in time.
I do want to make a little side note, Tim, about the numbers. And it is interesting, when the FTC's report just came out and the numbers were so high, it really piqued the interest. You add that together with Tinder swindler and those things. And the question that I get from reporters all the time now is, what are the numbers? What are the numbers? And that's what's so difficult, is we don't really have the numbers. So this is a great topic about trusting. And people are trusting those numbers. Well, we know they shouldn't trust those numbers until we get the numbers up. So,
well, let me jump in there. Yes and no.
Okay.
Trust that the magnitudes are approximately correct. All right. Is it 30 million? Is it 40 million? Is it 28 million? We can only give you our best estimates, and we're the only ones that are really tracking this well. So, for example, we estimate the number of arrests to be about 130,000 scammers, organized criminals worldwide last year. What do we base that upon? We base that upon reliable news articles that list the quantities of scammers arrested in each region. We also base that on reports that come from law enforcement agencies like the FBI, FTC, Europol, and the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission in Nigeria. So our numbers on arrests are pretty accurate. If anything, they're actually low, because we don't get reporting from many countries around the world. So for example, there were 12,000 teenagers arrested in South Korea last year for scamming. That's a giant number. There were 55,000 scammers arrested in Bhutan last year, 50,000 arrested in China last year. And China, by the way, is the world leader in arrests. Please keep your cameras turned off. Thank you. So in terms of the numbers that you cannot trust are those that are issued by the government because they are based exclusively on what's reported to them. All right, let's begin talking about a very difficult subject called trust. So as I have mentioned, I'm Dr. Tim McGuinness. I'm a director of SCARS. I'm a technologist. I'm a scientist. I'm an anthropologist, a veteran, a victims assistance provider, and a global expert on the topic of cyber criminality, regulatory compliance, and crime prevention. With me is Debby Montgomery Johnson, who I introduced previously. So let's move forward. What do we mean by trust? Okay, Debby stole some of that thunder early on by asking me what that meant. So I think we've established, except for those who come in late, what does trust really mean? It's your ability to be vulnerable because you are confiding and relying upon trustable information, trustable institutions, trustable individuals, family, friends, and trustable relationships. All right. So trust is defined. Again, we talked about this earlier, but here is the actual definition of what trust is, just so that we're all on the same page. So in the world of trust, we're going to talk about 6 basic types of trust that impact scam victims and the world of scams in general, but specifically scam victims. Stranger trust, sustained trust, lack of trust or over-trusting, trusting in others, trust in yourself, and others' trust in you. These are going to be difficult. Some of them may trigger you. So if you're a recent victim, try to listen through this, but if you can't, that's fine. You can listen on a recording when you're able to integrate this a little bit more fully. We're going to talk about some hard truths now, and some of this is not easy, particularly because it's going to impact your view of who you are at this moment, but it is based on psychological fact. Remember, SCARS is not a mental health care provider. We do not provide counseling or therapy. We don't provide therapeutic plans, action plans to help someone recover specific aspects of their personality. The information we present is generalized and provided for educational purposes only. What does it mean to trust someone or something? It means to make yourself vulnerable. And when you realize that you've trusted someone and made yourself vulnerable to them, trauma ensues based upon a person's resiliency. And that trauma translates into a variety of responses. But at the same time, there is the realization of the loss of trust. In other words, it's mourned like the death of a spouse or the breakup of a real relationship. And this means that there's multiple parallels that scam victims are going to be going through. Trauma responses, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, as well as the grief cycle. And in addition, and we'll touch on this briefly, there are addictive aspects to the fake relationships that victims enter into with their scammers. Regardless of the duration of the scam, these addictive qualities are there regardless. But again, every individual is different, and we're making no attempt here to diagnose any individual. That's the role of trauma counselors or therapists, and we do recommend that every scam victim seek out a local, competent professional counselor or therapist to assist them. Let's talk about stranger trust. And we have published about this for years. All of us human beings are hardwired to trust strangers. You're doing it right now by listening in on this webinar. You're trusting us. We're complete strangers. I might be a deep fake using the voice of Barack Obama, for anyone knows. But the reality is we are who we say we are, and you are encouraged to verify that by visiting our corporate website, which is againstscams.org. We place ourselves out in the public arena so that you can develop a degree of trust in us, but we don't ask for your trust. All we do is present information, education, and hopefully you'll take away something that you can use. Now, what is stranger trust? Animals who are social, which include human beings, evolved in a pack or a tribal context. Stranger trust was necessary because when you come into the world, everyone is a stranger. You have to be able to trust the members of your tribe. However, interestingly enough, most animals do not trust strangers. They will attack them, in many cases kill them, or at least drive them away. Human beings are unique in that we have evolved this sense of automatically trusting people that we run into. Now, when you do this online, you have none of the benefits of your full 5 senses. You only have what you see, and in some cases, what you can hear. And even if they don't reconcile, your cognitive biases, confirmation bias, relationshipness bias, etc., can override your logical mind and force you to trust someone that you have no business trusting. But if you see somebody on the street who walks up to you and says, "Hey, would you give me $40,000? You would look at them like they were insane. Reality is somebody online did exactly that and you gave it to them in most cases. Some victims do not give the money away, but they do enter into trusting relationships. As parents, we know this is a bad thing. Predators rely on this stranger trust in children and teens. In children, pedophiles. In teens, human traffickers. How do we get this message that you should not trust strangers across? This has been the dilemma of society, at least for the last half century. And we all know, even going back further, trust is something that should not be given. Look at indigenous populations and the degree of trust that they placed in the colonizers. So stranger trust is something that's hardwired into our brain, and we have to modify our behaviors to eliminate it. It is work.
It is interesting though, Tim, when it is interesting, when our children are little, we do teach stranger danger. And over time, work, does it? No, over time, that does go away. And then we're like, well, you meet somebody and we want you to shake their hand. You know, we want you to know who they are. And the kids are like, well, you just told me I shouldn't talk to this stranger, but now you're telling me to shake his hand. So we do have some things, like you said, hot wired. And I think particularly in my case, at a certain age, you want to trust everybody. No one ever told me not to trust someone online in an online dating thing. Even my mother said, hey, it's a great thing. So I went into it trusting, and which I think all of us who have been taken went in trusting. We've got to relearn that one.
Well, it's a little more profound than that. And it's quite a difficulty, because the same kind of trust applies to politicians. It applies to people in authority, and automatic trust has to be deferred until it's earned. Why do we trust politicians? Because they're charismatic, they say the right words, but we don't know if we can trust them. We never know if we can trust them unless we meet them in person and can use all of our 5 senses to properly evaluate them. The problem really is that, and I think this goes back to the children aspect again, we don't teach our children how to properly evaluate strangers. We simply give them a platitude, don't trust strangers. And that doesn't work because all it does is instill fear. Ironically, the whole stranger danger thing is imposing trauma on our children. We're far better off if we teach them how to properly evaluate everyone based upon integrity, actions, what they say and what they do, etc. So this is a behavioral change, and we try to do it, but clearly as adults, we failed. And the biggest example of this is when teenagers turn a certain age, all safeguards and risk avoidance goes out the window and they just jump off cliffs. The truth is, we don't have an answer for how to do this, other than the military actually has a pretty good model, and it's taught during basic training. And that is, you're either shooting at someone or they're shooting at you. It's pretty basic. All right. So when it comes to stranger trust, don't trust anyone online, period, until they earn your trust. And it takes more than a conversation and a certain affinity and some pretty language and an amygdala bomb before they're trustworthy. Now let's talk about sustained trust. What we're really talking about is the puppet and the puppet master relationship. Every scam victim, whether they sent money or not, was manipulated, unless you bailed out of the relationship within the first 5 minutes or 5 hours. If you didn't bail out immediately, you were being groomed and you were being manipulated to some end, to some extent. Scammers know how to build trust, relying on stranger trust, and to sustain it over the course of the scam. They have objectives in mind, predominantly 2 objectives. 1, get your money, all your money, even get you to take out loans to get more money, ask family and friends to get more money. They want more money. Or they want you to be a mule for them so they can get other people's money and funnel it through you. And unfortunately, this sustained trust, once it's settled in, is extraordinarily difficult to break. Most of the time, you either run out of money. Well, let me rephrase that. Most of the time, the scammers will give themselves away, which will break the sustained trust. So you run out of money, the scammer's behavior changes from being lovey-dovey to threatening, hostile, intimidating, or they simply cut you off. That's a form of breaking sustained trust during the course of the scam. There are some cases where the cumulative disease, disquiet, uncomfortableness, as the scam evolves, will begin to become more and more present in the relationship, just as it does in any real relationship. In a marriage, for example, marriages begin with, well, obviously stranger trust. A relationship develops and there is sustained trust for a long period of time until events or the other person break that sustained trust. Everybody who's been divorced understands that there comes a point when it just breaks. Now, in a real relationship, it can be fixed. You can repair sustained trust, but I'm not a marriage counselor. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. But in the case of the scam, when that sustained trust is broken, essentially the scam is over.
It's interesting. Excuse me, it's interesting to me, looking back, going into that online relationship, I wanted to build trust. And my whole looking at this, at the relationship, was build trust, like I had in my 26-year marriage. You build trust so that it's a long-term thing, not thinking that the person on the other side of this they had no trust. I mean, I always thought, even to the end, that there was some trust developed, but looking at it objectively, not him, their desire, unbeknownst to me, was to get me to trust him enough to give him money. And then that was it.
It was actually more than that. His desire was to get you to want him to trust you, which would lead to giving you money. So part of the gaslighting is changing your view of the world around you and the relationships that you have on the outside, so that A, you are more dependent upon them, and B, that dependency creates a need for them to trust you. You need that to happen because subtly they've gotten you to disconnect and disintegrate many of your trusting relationships on the outside.
Yeah, most of them.
Yep. All right, allow us to continue forward. So that is sustained trust, and it's something that we've not talked a lot about as a separate thing, but I'm hoping that every scam victim who sees this can comprehend the aspects of the mechanics that were involved in this manipulation. And by the way, this is a good point to interject this. I'm referring to everyone as a scam victim because that's the least common denominator. Some of you truly are survivors, some of you truly are thrivers. But we're talking about the context of the scam itself, and I think it makes it clearer so that everyone understands that we're really talking about you, regardless of where your state of recovery actually is.
But at the very beginning, we were all a victim. So
Indeed.
This was the beginning.
Now, let's talk about polar opposites. Lack of trust and overtrusting. Overtrusting sounds like it was from Buckaroo Banzai in the 8th dimension. But anyway, lack of trust. The scam has ended. You're now confronted with the reality that it was a scam. You don't quite believe it yet because you're in that shock stage immediately following the scam. You don't know who to trust. You don't trust anyone or anywhere. You don't trust your family. You don't trust your friends. You don't know what institutions to trust. You don't trust the police because everybody tells you that they don't do anything. Baloney. But the flip side of this is this need to be trusted. Now, we've heard interesting synonyms for this. The need to be valued, for example, the need to be worthy. It's really the need to be trusted. Partly because imagine what it was like 40 years ago in the case of sexual assault, and particularly a woman would go into the police department and they would feel that no one trusts what they're saying. It's taken us generations to get to the point where victims are trusted. But scam victims are not yet. And it's going to take a long time before that changes. Part of your view as a victim is that you don't trust yourself. Look what you just did. You sent your life savings to Nigeria or Indonesia or China or wherever it may happen to be. You identify the problem of trust in yourself. But at the same time, scam victims are going out there and hooking up with amateur anti-scam groups in the hundreds of thousands. People who have no experience other than the fact that they are a scam victim. This is, again, over-trusting. As a victim, what is one of your automatic responses? Well, only another scam victim will understand what I've been through. Baloney. Many other scam victims will not understand what you've gone through and will be, in fact, quite hostile towards you because they're transferring their aggression, their anger, their hate from the scammer to you. And this happens every single moment in the amateur anti-scam groups. Victims are over trusting. They come to our pages and every anti-scam page on social media, and they tell their stories without any concern about who's listening or what exposure or additional vulnerability they're creating. Scammers love to monitor anti-scam pages because they can identify victims that are perfect targets for follow-on scams. Hi, I'm a private detective in Hole in the Wall, North Dakota, and I'm going to get your money back. Or this guy on Instagram was so professional, he got my money back in 14 and a half seconds. Or this is the police in Ghana, and we've identified your scammer, but we charge a small investigative fee. Or we're a certain corporation in California that you can come to our website and pay a small fee and we'll tell you if they're a scammer. You already knew that. The reality is you have to stop being over trusting. Don't trust anybody. Your need to be trusted is secondary to your need to be safe and your need to recover. This is a hard lesson.
Well, and I'm thinking, I'm listening at when the scammer confessed to me, I immediately thought something's wrong. You know, you're lying. And I said, prove to me that this is a scam, which is silly. I mean, and so he actually came online in person when I saw him. And that's when I hit that brick wall. It's like, oh my gosh, this is somebody that has lied to me for 2 years.
But you trusted what he said when he confessed.
Absolutely, I did. It made me feel better. You know, why else would he confess? And honestly, in my case, if he had just disappeared like most of them do, I'll be totally honest. I don't know that I would have recovered as well or as quickly because when my husband died and left, he left and then died the next day. I never saw him. So in this case, if the scammer had just disappeared, that trigger of Lou dying away from me would have come back. And this time it would have been $1 million, less in the bank. So for me, it was a good thing that the scammer came online and I saw that face. And that was, like I said, that brick wall, that slap in the face that, oh my gosh, Deb, you were taken. But I needed the validation of seeing, and again, it was a stranger. I'm looking at this picture of a stranger, but the stranger was not the handsome Brit man that I thought I was in love with. This was a young Nigerian man who I knew young Nigerian men were scammers. And so, put the 2 and 2 together there. And it was, I don't know. I needed validation. I needed to trust myself that I'd been scammed.
But as we know from empirical evidence, he was setting you up for a secondary scam, but at the same time, because you cleanly severed the connection, it never materialized and it never happened. But unfortunately, with many victims, those secondary scam attempts can come days, weeks, months later. Mm-hmm. And the impulsiveness of immediately jumping on a message or an email that comes from an unknown person is a strong indicator that the behavior has not changed, that they're still over trusting when, having been scammed, the greatest example of why not to trust anybody, yet that trust is still given with wild abandon. And that's also a behavior change that needs to take place. Okay. Trust in others, other victims, family and friends, police, professional. Now, we touched on that briefly. So let's talk about trust in other victims. This, again, is inappropriate trust. Now, in our support groups, we enforce a simple rule. Everybody in the group is a stranger until you've observed them over a long enough period of time to be able to establish a degree of trust between members of the group. We prohibit direct contact between new members and any other members in the group. Why? Because A, we don't know them either. They are strangers. Trust is earned, it's not granted automatically. So when someone comes into one of our support groups, we provide an environment where they can reestablish trust in themselves and project trustworthiness to others. But unfortunately, because we're talking about trauma, there are a multitude of trauma responses, and many of them are quite negative, quite harmful, not only to the victim, but to others around them, particularly other victims who inappropriately trust other victims without reason. An example of this: when someone is profoundly traumatized, a variety of disorders can develop, plus they bring with them all of their prior psychology, past traumas, cognitive distortions, etc. So one of the things that makes it difficult for men, especially, to acknowledge that they're scam victims is they have this thing called the white knight syndrome, where guys want to rescue damsels in distress. And when you find the truth, it's incredibly difficult. But at the same time, most scam victims jump into sort of this default state where they believe they're going to make sure that nobody else is scammed. They're going to save everybody. They're going to educate them about scams. They have no freaking idea. They're not experts. They have no prior training. They're just a victim. Being a victim does not qualify anyone to help others immediately. Over time, yes, you can put in the hours and the years to become more expert in the subject matter. Only if you have the right orientation and motivation, however. But if you jump in from the onset that you're going to save people, you're a danger to other victims. Let me say that again. You're a danger to other victims. Now, by the same token, as victims go through their grief cycle and settle on their default fight response, they can be really angry, really hateful, antagonizing, hostile to other victims and those people that are trying to provide support and education and assistance. We see this every day. Some victim will come along through one of our pages and they will just launch into a rant about the EFCC, about SCARS, about the FBI, about the FTC. Nobody is doing anything. Or a similar paradigm is, well, it's about time these scammers got arrested. Well, it's about time they did something about them too. That's a hard thing to hear. But each victim is as much part of the solution as they are part of the problem. If only 1% report, 99% are part of the problem because they're enabling scammers to continue to do what they do. All right. So be careful about strangers, no matter where they are, no matter what labels are applied to them. Friends and family. Now let's talk about this for a minute. This is a contentious topic. Victims, after they discover the scam, carry away a variety of significant responses: self-blame, guilt, shame. That shame is profound and it can translate into feelings of alienation from friends and family. In fact, it turns into actual dislike, actual hostility, partly because the victim doesn't believe the family and friends will understand, that they will judge them. Of course they will judge them. Everybody judges everybody. But because of those feelings of guilt and shame, etc., walls are built between the victim and their friends and family. It's up to the victim to break through those walls and reestablish trust. It's up to the victim to let friends and families forgive them. You don't have to explain every detail. And the truth is, they don't want to know about the dialogue that you had at 3 o'clock in the morning. They want to know about the basics, but they also want to know that you're going to be okay, because they really do want to help in most cases. So you have to trust others yourself who have been trustworthy in the past, and trust that they may say things that are quite uncomfortable, maybe derogatory, maybe judgmental, but their heart is in the right place. Now let's talk about police. Most scam victims distrust the police. They shouldn't. Police aren't going to arrest them. Even if you're a money mule, police aren't going to arrest you unless they've told you to stop and you don't listen. But only 1% of victims go to the police. And part of the reason is other victims telling you it's not going to do any good. They don't do anything. They don't lift a finger to help you. Well, that's mostly not true. In most of the Western world, crime victims have rights. The police are your interface for activating and accessing those rights. Part of the problem with trust in the police is the victim's own unrealistic expectations. You go in there believing that they're going to get on a plane in the next 15 minutes and they're going to go to Ghana and they're going to arrest that scammer, drag their butt back to El Segundo, California, and they're going to go to jail for the rest of their lives. That's another fantasy. So the police have one job. They take criminal complaints, they investigate when it's warranted, they arrest criminals and refer them for prosecution. But your scammer is in another country. They can't do anything. So it defaults back to the first one. Take the criminal complaint, the criminal report, so that it can flow up through the justice system from the local police department to the state to the federal authorities. In the end, you're going to end up reporting the crime probably 3, 4, 5, 6 times. Okay, you have to be your own advocate because nobody else is going to be, at least not initially. Also, your police report gives you access to certain benefits at the state or provincial level or national level in other countries. Getting that report number is really important, but most important is filing the report by doing your duty as a citizen. Whether you're a citizen or not, it's still your duty.
And we talked about this, Tim, that is a first step for a victim to regain some power and some control.
Yes, it is.
Because when I went to the FBI and they told me that there was nothing that they could do, and that's when they called me the victim and, had been manipulated, I'm like, oh no, I'm not going to take on that label. And but I did go in with all my extensive records. I did have my parents with me, so I didn't go in alone. I had someone that I trusted go with me. And I got that report, I put it out there, and then it took a long time for me to trust that what I gave them had been used. And that actually came out when we went to court in November. And I saw what the FBI can do with that information. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we've got to get the word out that the reports are important. We as individuals may not see that, see resolution at the time, but it's really important that we get our report in, and it's important.
I see we have a question. Do you want to speak the question?
Absolutely. The question comes in is, in our experience, how willing are family members of a victim to learn about the scams to help their family members who were scammed? I'll speak from my experience. I hid it from my children for quite a while. I actually came out public And my oldest heard a recording of my story. Not the way to do it, folks. Because speaking of trust, he just went unglued. He came through a Skype conversation at me, and I sat there and I let him get it out. He needed to. He deserved to be able to do that.
Because he was also a victim.
He was. And when I realized that when his dad died, he was the one that got the phone call. He took on that mantle of protector, protecting mom. And when I listened to his objections of what happened, it all came down to, Mom, you didn't trust me. You didn't listen to me.
That's exactly right.
And I felt horrible because I didn't want him to be my protector. I told him, when he said, don't, I'm like, hey, I'm an adult, leave me alone. But when it all came down, I think he thought perhaps I was going to have to come live with him. I assured him I was okay, but I didn't trust him. And I had to acknowledge that and validate that, yes, I didn't listen to you and I'm sorry. But going forward, we can talk about these things. It changed our relationship in a really good way, more from adult to adult rather than mother or son. And it was an important discussion, but it could be very difficult. I fortunately had my parents who they had been part of this whole thing anyway. They knew what had gone on. I could open up to them and they wanted to learn about it. If anybody knows anything about scams right now, it's my 87 and 92-year-old parents. But daily, I'm telling them to watch out. Don't answer phone calls. This whole stranger danger, be careful. Don't trust. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to let the families know. And my kids knew everything only because I'd gone so public. But as we've talked about within the support groups, they don't have to know the dollar amount. They just need to know that you're going to be okay, that you don't need a place to live. And if you do need a place to live, then tell them. Let them know you may need some assistance, but it may not be them that have to do the assisting. Just you have to get it out there.
Yeah, remember, there is no shame in asking for help. There's
Scammers do it all the time.
In refusing to ask for help when you need it or refusing to accept help when it's offered. Now, let's talk about professionals. Us, me, I'm a professional. Debbie's a professional. So let's talk about trust in professionals. So one of the things that immediately is a problem is anybody can say they're an anti-scam investigator. Look it up. See if they have a private detective license, which is required to be an investigator, to use that word. You'll find that this big company that uses the buzzword doesn't have the license. There are scam investigators all over the place that take victims' money and do basically nothing. Yes, they can look at the IP address and verify that it's from Ghana or that it's from Nigeria. And there's always ways to do that, but it doesn't matter because it's not going to change what happened to you or what you need to do to move forward through that experience. Verify every professional that you put your trust into. That includes psychologists, it includes financial advisors, it includes lawyers, it includes scam victim service providers like SCARS. Now, SCARS is the only one in the globe that provides the kind of assistance that we do. AARP does not. AARP is a great educational resource, and they do a tremendous amount to try to spread the word about avoidance and to some extent discovery, but they're not doing much in the way of recovery. So be careful who you trust. That is the central message that we're trying to share with that. All right, now something that's quite contentious. Trust in yourself. Can you trust yourself? You're not going to like the answer. The answer is for probably the first 9 to 12 months, no, you can't be trusted. Because you're exhibiting behaviors that are controlled by your trauma, that are controlled by your grief, that are controlled from the addiction that occurred during the scam. So you have to look at your decisions through the lens of, can I trust the decision I'm making? And if you can elongate the time, in other words, sleep on it, give yourself time to think about it, do nothing impulsively or rashly, you can begin to reestablish your own trust in your decision making. But if you act impulsively, it's almost always wrong, because your decisions are still being ruled by that little rat brain in the back of your head, the amygdala, and its cohorts that basically react emotionally instead of logically. So this includes your feelings at any given point in time as well. We constantly alert victims to be on guard for those transitions in the grief cycle that everybody is familiar with, from shock to denial to anger to negotiation to acceptance. Because some of those transition moments are extraordinarily difficult and have a huge impact on trusting yourself and overconfidence. Anger looks, feels, and smells like confidence. You're angered, you're enraged, you're full of hate. That's confidence. It feels good. It floods your body with neurotransmitters and hormones again, kind of like you had when you were in the throes of the loving relationship. You need to develop the right kind of confidence, which is based upon reestablishing safe behaviors, because your ability to evaluate risk is out the window. Your ability to trust your emotions is out the window, particularly in the first 6 months, because you're all over the place. And that's hard to hear, but it's reality. And that's one of the reasons why we encourage scam victims to seek out a trauma counselor or a therapist, because you need to hear it from someone more than just us. We're not trying to diagnose you. We're treating most victims with the same brush. We generalize and we publish articles and information that you can then use to evaluate yourself. We're not trying to psychoanalyze or diagnose you. We're suggesting generalizations that may apply to you. And it's up to you to be cognitive enough to see whether they do, or at least go and ask your counselor or your therapist, does this apply to me? Am I exhibiting these behaviors? And if you are, they'll develop a therapy plan to help you change that. That's their role. This is our role, to educate. So a poster child for developing the right confidence is my co-host, Debby. When she went out into the world to start telling her story, this was proper validation. This was the development of proper trust in herself. This was the development of the right level of confidence. But when it's all just a rat whirling around inside your head, it's probably not.
That's interesting.
Debbie?
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm thinking about that. And for me, it was several years after the scam that I was willing to speak up. I did hide it, and that's where the whole woman behind the smile came from. But when I did start speaking up, it was after I realized that by speaking up, it wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't my story. It was, can I be there for one other person to either prevent it happening or to be there to help them after the fall? Because that in-between spot, if you can't get them within 2 weeks of prevention, we're picking them up when they're broken. And for me, when I get an email that says, I wish I heard your story before, I'm thinking, oh gosh, why didn't I speak up before? But I wasn't ready. It took some time for me to work on me. And that whole reflection and development and therapy and all that. I mean, I was going through a lot with some family members too. And so listening to the therapist for my kids or whatever was going on, I applied it to me. And I had to get strong in me, but I also had buddies. I got help with, well, I don't like the word help here. I looked for associates for my team, for my company. I was trying to do so many things on my own, and that didn't work out. So there's no I in team. I brought in helpers for my work. I brought in helpers for the, you and I connected after a newspaper article. I wasn't alone, and I realized that my message could be strong because honestly, every time I speak, I get stronger from the inside out.
Right.
And it becomes my mission. And when I get CBS contacted me the other day, I have an interview on Monday. I say, yes, absolutely. Because they need to hear from us what is happening. They need to see that we are not whiny victims, that we have a message to talk about, that there is a lot of information out there that's not getting out to the right people. And
Yes.
A lot of people are being hurt. So yes, trusting in myself now, absolutely. But I listen to you, I listen to others. And part of me sometimes still rebels a little bit, thinking, well, yeah, he did fall in love with me at the end. Well, you tell me that's part of the scam. Whatever, maybe,
You raised a point, which is the media, and this goes back to trusting professionals. The problem is that many victims will immediately jump into a media interview, and we strongly recommend against this. If somebody wants to interview, ask us, we'll properly qualify them. Because if their motivation is to make you look like a fool, you don't want to do it. But at the same time, you also have to be ready with enough of the proper kind of confidence, or that interview will be profoundly traumatized. It'll set you back dramatically. So it's always important to put these things in context. Now, let's jump back in here. Others trust in you. Now, this is going to be even harder. Why should anybody trust you? Now, think about that for a minute, but honestly, think about that for a minute. When you jumped into this scam and you began to be groomed, and especially when the manipulation began, you were not trustworthy. Again, I'm speaking in generalities about most victims, not everybody, right? So don't get angry, listen. Did you lie to family and friends? Did you tell them that this was real and you knew it was real and you were going to live happily ever after? Did you borrow money from people promising to pay them back with no realistic knowledge that you could? Did you take out loans under false pretenses? Did you send money, lying to the bank, lying to the money transfer services? You did. If you send any money by Western Union, MoneyGram, Zelle, they all ask you, do you really know this person? You lied. You're not trustworthy yet, but it will come in time as you reestablish their trust in you, your trust in them, and the confidence that comes from doing the right thing and changing your behaviors. Now, it's really hard to say that you're not trustworthy, but that's because your trauma, the residual aspects of the addiction, the grief, mean that you're reacting emotionally. It doesn't mean you're a criminal. You may have been a mule. You may have received money. You may have forwarded. That's a criminal act. Lying to a bank or a financial institution is a criminal act. It's called wire fraud. You could be prosecuted for that, but you won't be because you were operating under duress. But that duress continues after the scam ends because you have to flush out all of the residual effects of the manipulation, including shame. Shame changes your behaviors. So as your friends and your families look upon you, they see that you're not the person that you used to be, that they trusted. It's natural for them not to feel complete trust. It's important that you understand this and that you don't take out your aggression because you feel distrusted on them. They're responding appropriately. What if you were an addict on cocaine? Would you view their behaviors differently? No, you do them exactly the same because that's an addictive behavior. You view an addict views family and friends as a tool to be used to get high. Scam victims use family and friends in much the same way to achieve their result, which is the fantasy outcome for the fake relationship. And it's important that you understand that you're not the only victim in the scam. You've made all of your friends and family members victims as well. Debbie talked about her son and her parents. They became co-victims with you. And in some cases, a victim who is married, for example, the spouse is victimized not only because of the behavior of the scam victim, but also because of the internet infidelity that comes along with it. They have to deal with the fact that you took money out of joint accounts or whatever the case may be, but that you also engaged in an out-of-marriage relationship. That's hard to deal with. That's a marriage breaker for a lot of people. And we're not trying to provide marriage counseling here, but in most cases, there are ways back. If the victim can acknowledge the fact that their friends and families were victimized by the scammer as well, and that the victim needs to rebuild their trust. And it begins by being brutally, radically honest about everything you're going through with them. It doesn't mean you have to talk about everything, but what you have to tell them has to be the truth every single time, because they've seen you go through the scam lying to them or misrepresenting lying. As a scam victim in recovery, there is no room for lies. Everything has to be the truth because trust has to be reestablished, both in yourself, in the people around you, in the people that you're working with, the institutions, the police. Trust has to be rebuilt everywhere. So when we present information, I'm a blunt weapon because I believe in a high degree of radical honesty. Because I believe that you cannot process this experience without the knowledge and the confidence in the source of that knowledge. And that means we don't whitewash things. We don't tell little white lies. We applaud positive behavior and we exemplify through education negative behavior so that you know the direction the yellow brick road goes and how to make it through the deep dark forests full of flying monkeys, because they are there. They're going to crop up many times over the course of recovery. They're going to crop up when you hit that point of you wake up one morning and you're annoyed with everybody and anger begins to set in. Or negotiation. Why can't it be real again? Or denial. I can't believe this happened to me. It's impossible. It couldn't be true. So you're going to go through all of that roller coaster of grief, but you're also going to go through the trauma responses. Every time that you see a scammer or a message, something's going to trigger. It'll be a fight, a flight, a freeze, or a fawn response. We've had victims go for years without the ability to get off the couch. Gradually, through counseling, therapy, and being able to hear the truth constantly, they've been able to pick themselves up by their bootstraps. And that's what we're here for. We're not here to save anybody. We're not here to fix anybody. We're here to give you the truth so that you can fix yourself.
I want people to take a moment right now to just breathe, because I remember the first time that it was actually Tim said to me that I lied. And I'm thinking, oh, how could I'm not a liar. I'm an Air Force officer or a banker, blah, blah, blah. But when I went to Western Union and told them that I knew who I was sending that $2,500 to, that was a lie. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it wasn't the little white lie. I did not know that man. I questioned him as to who I was sending it to. But when I started to think about all those things, I was pretty skilled at banking. I knew my way around the banking world. And I had to, at the end, say, yes, I did do those things.
Now,
And
it's important to remember that you're not to blame. You were manipulated. So set aside the shame, set aside the anger and the annoyance, set aside the self-blame and the guilt.
exactly.
You did these things because you were manipulated. Pure and simple. But just as a drug addict or an alcoholic is engaged in behaviors driven by the drug, it's still important that you acknowledge that you did them because the people around you saw it happening. And you need to reestablish their trust in you, which is why we're having this webinar, because this is an incredibly difficult topic to talk about and internalize and assimilate, because there is so much shame and there is so much guilt. And every one of those little Jenga blocks is yet another piece of the guilt. We turned one over the other day and found a little creepy crawly under it, which is a lot of people are actually guilty, not because they were deceived, but because they secretly still wish it had been true. So you got to open every cupboard, look in every drawer, look for those creepy crawlies that are creeping around the back of your brain and put a spotlight on them and say, aha, here's another one, and stomp on it. Now, you'll need the help of a counselor or a therapist most of the time to do this. We don't tell you you need counselors and therapists because we think you're weak or because we think you're crazy or you're insane. You're traumatized. There's no shame in that. A significant portion of soldiers coming back from war are traumatized. Accident victims are traumatized. Crime victims are traumatized. When you go through a traumatic experience, which relationship scams are, you're going to come out beaten up. And your resiliency is going to determine the extent of the trauma. But more importantly, it's what you do afterwards that determines how deep the trauma will go. Our only goal is to tell you the truth so that you can learn from it, adapt it, internalize it, change your behaviors, and repair the harm that may have been done.
It takes time, but it's a step at a time.
Yep.
And it can be done.
Now, it sounds like trust is very black and white, but it's not. It's just shades of gray. Everything is a spectrum. Every scam victim's experience is a spectrum. Trauma is a spectrum. Grief is a spectrum. The addictive aspects are a spectrum. Nobody is the same, but at the same time, nobody is different. Nobody is special. All scam victims were subjected to the same kinds of manipulative techniques, and if they went along for the ride, they came out of it traumatized. To what extent? Not our job to diagnose and to identify that. That's where mental health care providers are extraordinary. And the truth is, we've observed that an awful lot of victims carry past traumas with them that made them actually more susceptible to being scammed. So survival mode is the mode that most victims immediately adopt when the scam ends. It comes with the shock. it takes a really long time to disengage from survival mode. And if you don't know what we mean, we published on it, and we will, when we post this presentation, we'll include links to the relevant articles and other sources. You have to stop focusing on survival, but that's really hard and it takes time. It may take a year, it may take 4 years, depends on the person. It also depends upon how rapidly they begin to work on their recovery. If somebody comes in their first month, they're going to have a much easier ride than somebody who comes in 6 months or a year or 3 years later, because those disorders have set in solidly and they're going to need a lot more support from professional mental health care providers than some others will, but everybody needs counseling. And just remember, you need somebody who's going to be able to listen to what you say and give you a plan to work through it. Don't just listen to other victims because they don't know how to get through this because they haven't gotten through it themselves. Even people like Debby, who've been through this process, cannot tell every victim how they're going to get through it. Our job is to tell you, this is the pathway. Follow this, and there's road markers along the way, and there are things that are going to be bumps in the road and beasties in the night. And by the way, go see a counselor or a therapist, because when you hit those bumps, some of them will be easy, some of them will be nightmares. Focus on thriving. Focus on changing your mentality after the survival mode, after the survivor experience, so that you're focused not on the past, but only on the future, with an awareness of safety and risk, and you're actively communicating to other people so that they can avoid this as well. Because if you just tell 2 people a month, within a year, if they tell 2 people and they tell 2 people, within a year, we could substantially see scams brought under control. But it's the fact that victims don't report, don't talk about these crimes, and it's an evolution. We saw the same evolution in sexual assault. We saw the same evolution in domestic abuse. We saw the same evolution in drunk driving. We have seen the same evolution in racism. There are no races in scars. Everybody has the same color of paint. We're probably one of the best organizations to demonstrate that we help people regardless, race, creed, religion, national origin, regardless of mentality, regardless of physicality. We're here to help everybody. So at this point, what I'd like to suggest is verify who we are. And if you feel you can trust us, do so. So we're a little long in this, but I think at this point in time, what we should do is open this up to questions if anyone has them. Get going, everybody. Type your questions into the chat. And we'll spend a few minutes to answer them, assuming it's a good question. If it's a good question, you'll get a gold star. So I'm talking aimlessly while I'm giving you an opportunity to type in your question. If you don't have any questions, just put in no questions, please, so that we know that we can conclude and move on.
I just want to make one last comment. A good friend of mine, Deborah Morrison, who has done some training for financial having a brain cramp. But anyway, Deborah always tells me, don't take up residence in your current situation, in your scam, in your grief. Don't take up residence, move forward. Failing forward fast is something I've heard, and things happen. And we didn't make a mistake, we took a misstep. And our misstep has led us off the course, but now correct that course and get back on the plan. And just reassess your, your expectations. Where do you want to be? The past has happened. You can't change any of it. Move on. So here's a question. What is the difference between a trauma therapist versus a regular counselor? Good question.
Okay. So counselors and therapists can be the same thing. Trauma therapy or trauma counselors have specialized training and experience dealing with traumatized individuals. Regular analytical therapists or counselors do not. However, there's multiple parts of the therapeutic process. So any counselor that you can talk to who will listen to what you have to say and can help you move forward is valuable, whether they've had the specialized training or not. But it's also important that if you don't feel comfortable with a counselor and therapist, regardless of who they are, that you go and find another, because that comfort is what breaks down the walls and allows the therapist to really help you. So comfort is a big part of it. Training is equally important, but if a therapist isn't a specialized trauma therapist, okay, that may not be a bad thing if you really trust and confide in that therapist, and they can develop an effective plan for you to move forward. So there are multiple methodologies in therapy, and not being a mental health professional myself, I don't want to stomp over the explanation of all of that. But if you can, find a trauma counselor or a trauma therapist. But we recognize that money, funding may be an issue for many victims because you've given away your last cent. So you can also go to opencounseling.org or .com and find counselors who will provide free or reduced cost counseling as well. Most counseling is going to be helpful to you, but you have to be your own advocate. You have to be aware of what you're looking to achieve and what this other person, whether it's SCARS or anyone else, can really do for you, and recognize that if they're not doing what you need to move on. That's true in our support groups too. Many of our victims reach a point of recovery where they feel they don't need the group anymore and they go silent. And that's fine. Move on, live your life, become happy again.
One quick question, Dr. Tim. Will it be easier for you to get scammed a second time, even if you're in recovery?
The answer is yes, if you don't change any behaviors. Why? Scam victims come out of the experience the same person they were during the scam. Not so much the person they were before, but during the scam. The manipulation remains. Part of the effect of manipulation is to set you up to either be silent or to be reused at a later time. Not all scammers are really aware that's what they're doing, but because they're following well-executed scripts, it has that result. How do you know that's true? How many times have you gotten a message from a stranger and you immediately clicked on it because you thought it was your scammer and you wanted to see what they had to say? If you did that, you were just re-scammed. That was a second scam that you did to yourself. That doesn't sound nice, but it is in fact reality. Most victims, this is the encouraging part, most victims will change their behaviors enough and who will learn enough so that they will be one and done. That will be their only scam. But unfortunately, we have a board member whose stepfather was scammed in excess of 30 times. He lost everything he had in life. So the average in our experience is 3.4 times. Why? Because a lot of people are scammed once and never again. but a lot of people are scammed over and over and over and over and over and over again. We have members of our support groups who've been scammed 3-4 times. They unfortunately did not get the level of support, kind of knowledge and education necessary to realize that their personality was the primary cause for this. Doesn't mean they're crazy, doesn't mean they're bad. It just means there was some aspect of their personality, maybe a past trauma, I don't know, that contributed to their need to be trusted, validated, valued, and to enter into fake relationships one after another, and that need to be trusted. That's a behavior that has to change. Any other questions from anyone?
Okay. How do I, since I will be interviewed by the police next week, I want to introduce scars to the detective. How do I do that without overwhelming him with information?
Couple of simple ways. First off, go to our YouTube channel and get the link for our video addressed to the police. It's 3 minutes long. And give that to the detective. Best way to do that is in an email after the fact. And in the process, send him or her information about romancescamsnow.com and about our organization. So what I would say is introduce our existence during the interview and tell him there's some additional information you'd like to share. Can you get his email address and send it to them after the fact?
We do have a guide for law enforcement. Is that something
We do.
we could give to
But
them?
we also have a 3-minute video form of it that is more impactful, that we call our plea from scam victims. And that video can more easily be shared within the department, which is our ultimate goal. We've had about 35 police chiefs around the country that have shared it with their entire police forces. Unfortunately, even though I'm connected with 1,000 police chiefs around the country, getting them to pay attention to the problem is a real challenge. And this is where it comes back to being your own advocate. You have the ability to call the police chief and make an appointment and tell them what you think was good or bad about the reporting experience, whether or not their officers informed you of your victim's rights, connected you with a local advocate who could provide free counseling, because every victim in the United States gets free victims counseling. People in Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, and Europe, where they have national healthcare systems, you get counseling as part of your healthcare system. Use it. Any other questions before we close?
Just a clarification on the 3-minute video, Tim. We'll try to find that. Maybe we can put that out on the website.
I will post it to the individual who asked it.
Okay. Good support today, folks. Thank you so much.
Debbie, do you have any questions?
Did you say me?
Yes, Debbie, you.
No, I learn so much every day, and this has been a very good experience for me. Thank you for including me and the rest of the group that's here. It's a valuable conversation, and again, one that we have to become comfortable being uncomfortable.
That's right.
That's how you grow. And
unfortunately, this is a 20-pound sledgehammer to drive in a nail in a picture frame. But unfortunately, we have to use the tools that are at hand as well.
And fear is part of growing. So we don't want fear to go away. I was reading a great book the other day, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. You don't want it to go away because that means you're not growing. So just push through it. Don't reside in it. Learn from it and keep going. That's another topic. Fear is another topic.
The purpose of fear is to keep you alive, to motivate you. Fear is a response to stimulus. And if you don't have the proper response to stimulus, this is what happens.
We'll talk about this on another show.
So maybe we will do a webinar on fear at some point in the future, but there's 1,000 topics to talk about.
Thank
Hope you found this of value. This has been a presentation of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. I'm Dr. Tim McGuinness. I thank my co-host, Debby Montgomery Johnson. This presentation and video are copyright 2022, Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, SCARS. We're an incorporated nonprofit organization based in Miami, Florida, and Monterrey, Nuevo Leon, Mexico, supporting scam victims worldwide. If you are a scam victim, there is help available. You may not like what we say, but it is going to be the truth, and it will help you in the long run. Or we recommend counseling and therapy for everybody. Thank you so much for listening, and please visit romancescamsnow.com to learn more about scams, recovery, and the psychology of scams. Report all scams to the Federal Trade Commission and to anyscam.com so that they are distributed worldwide. We'll share with you the specific FTC link because we are a Federal Trade Commission Sentinel reporting partner. And we'd love to hear your feedback on this program, whether you found it of value, whether you think we're idiots, whether you hate us, whatever it may happen to be. We have thick skins. Thank you, everyone, and you have a great weekend.
Thanks, Tim.